the North Star. She opened the earth, walking with blood-soaked feet. She challenged the whip, the gun, the knife. She challenged the fire, pulled from the bodies of slaves, made into laws, prisons, and courts. Screaming white-hot flames and agony, she challenged millions of headhunters, dragging and ripping apart impossible tender moments of time, shipping vessels of history, ancient history, destroying the fabric, the godlike claw of destiny of a people with a gun, a knife, a cannon, building the hideous wall of blood called slavery.
Greetings, good afternoon, and welcome back, as always. What lessons are we learning from the most recent developments with countries on the African continent? What are we learning about the colonial mindset, the neo-colonial mindset, the worldview, and the shifting imperialist mindset? Let's connect the dots and find out.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.
Welcome to the Connecting the Dots podcast with Dr. Wilmer Leon, and I am Wilmer Leon. Here's the point. We have a tendency to view current events as though they occur in a vacuum, failing to understand the broader historic context in which most events take place. During each episode, my guests and I have probing, provocative, and in-depth discussions that connect the dots between these events and the broader historic context in which they occur, thus enabling you to better understand and analyze the events that are impacting the global village in which we live. On today's episode, the issue before us is, well, I've said this before, but I think it bears repeating. There are times, epochs of substantive change. Usually, you come to the realization upon reflection of a moment or a period. Rarely do you have the ability to recognize the moment when you are actually in the moment. Folks, I believe we are in one of those moments. My guest is an incredibly deep thinker. He's a teacher, researcher, activist, analyst, and a really good person. For me, one of the real benefits of doing this show is I get to engage with people like KJ Noh. KJ, my brother, welcome back.
Thank you. Pleasure to be with you.
Before we get to the issue at hand, I feel compelled to comment on this. The Trump administration's MAHA report, MAHA report, cites non-existent scientific studies. There's new evidence that the MAHA report, Making Our Children Healthy Again, relied in part on scientific research that does not exist. And that's the headline. Let me read a couple paragraphs to set this up. After Donald Trump and his White House team unveiled the Make American Children Healthy Again report, the MAHA report, last week, the New York Times noted, quote, the document echoes talking points Health Secretary Robert Kennedy has championed for decades. That was among the obvious red flags surrounding the report. Kennedy is, after all, notorious for pushing unscientific conspiracy theories and claiming, among other things, that Wi-Fi causes leaky brain. Any document reflecting his ideas related to healthcare policy should reflectively be treated with skepticism. With this in mind, no one was especially surprised when the White House report started crumbling under scrutiny. The Washington Post reported, quote, some of the report's suggestions stretched the limits of science, medical experts said. Several sections of the report offer misleading representations of findings in scientific papers, end quote. Final point. That was last week. This week, Notice advanced, NOTUS, advanced these concerns, reporting that the administration's Make America Healthy Again report misinterprets some studies and cites others that don't exist, according to the listed authors. The administration, KJ, just dismisses them as citation errors. If I could put words in your mouth before you even say anything, KJ, I think that's called fraud. KJ Noh.
Yes. Well, I mean, this is inexcusable. If you're creating scientific policy or scientific recommendations for the entire country, you owe it to the people to actually have done the research and to have clearly documented what your evidence is. What this looks like, it looks like a redux of what we saw with the Trump tariffs, in that they probably used AI to generate plausible text, and that AI went on to hallucinate its own citations. And so this is the core issue. And of course, the larger issue here is also the fact that, Robert F. Kennedy is a lawyer. And, we are a country that is led by lawyers. And lawyers are not necessarily known for their proficiency in science and math. I mean, if they were, they would have probably gone into a different field. But so there's systemic issues, there are leadership issues, and the fact that we are essentially hallucinating public policy. That is a real issue. That is a real problem that we're facing right now.
It was a couple of weeks ago, maybe a month or so ago, that an attorney got caught presenting a brief in court, and the judge found out that the cases that were cited in support of the attorney's position were fictitious and had been created by AI. If this were one of my students, then they'd fail the class, because Morgan State University has very clear stated policies on these types of lies. And I can't express firmly enough, emphatically enough, folks, to KJ, to your point, we're talking healthcare policy stated by the United States government that is not proven to be wrong it is proven to be false, a lie, not a unfortunate misrepresentation of fact. It was a lie. KJ, this.
So
and the other thing is, it seems to have just the story just seems to have gone by the wayside.
yes. So I mean, so here are the systemic issues, as you pointed out. If you use AI in your schoolwork, in your assignments, that is considered fraud, right? That is a kind of automated plagiarism. And then if you work as a subcontractor for the government, there are very, very strict guidelines of regarding the use of AI, and very often, it is restricted. For example, if you were documenting, clinical care, though there would be highly, highly restricted guidelines on what you could and couldn't use. But at the same time, we're seeing that from the very top, at the leadership, there is this kind of, unbridled and unquestioned and uncritical use of these tools that we know are prone to hallucination. And granted, you can do some of that work as a draft, but you still need to go back and check it and check your citations. So this is just basic stuff that is not being done. But the larger issue here, I think, is really one about governance and leadership and policy itself. There are fundamental issues here. Now, some of the things that, the Maha report is saying in its broadest sense are not bad things. They're saying that, junk food is bad for you. They're saying there are too many environmental pollutants. They're saying that kids are over-medicated. And they say that sedentary lifestyles are bad. Okay, there's a whole lot of other things that are missing, but those broad brush guidelines are not bad advice. But the thing is, the devil is always in the details, and those details have to be correct, and they have to be grounded in facts and evidence. Otherwise, you are simply undermining your own project. Whatever good is in that project has already been undermined because the rollout is so fraudulent.
And, you're absolutely right. And let me put it in another context. This report was not being given the opinions, the points that you just articulated, for as clear and as accurate as they are. This was not a PTA meeting. This is supposed to be the basis of government policy upon which the country is supposed to have faith. You can debate the detail of the policy, but one of the things you're not supposed to have to challenge is the veracity of the research that was done to create the policy. And when the administration brings a Robert F. Kennedy Jr. to be the Secretary of HHS, when he has already been exposed as a conspiracy theorist, he has already been exposed as taking positions that are based on debunked data. I don't even know if you can call debunked data. And then all they're doing is regurgitating stuff that has already been disproven. We're in very, very dangerous territory, KJ.
So here's the systemic breakdown of both policy and of research and even knowledge in the West under a capitalist regime. The academies have been captured by corporations that fund research, that drive research to their own advantageous conclusions. On the other hand, you have leadership, which is run by lawyers. The US is a country which is run by lawyers. We don't have rule of law. We have rule of lawyers in this country. And Robert F. Kennedy clearly is not a scientist. He, is a lawyer, and the job of a lawyer is to tell a convincing story.
Mm-hmm.
We call this the theory of the case. Theory of the case is just a fancy word for storytelling. And you're, in a trial, if your story is better than your counterpart's story, then you win. That's fine for, certain types of law, but you cannot run a country and you cannot run policy on that basis. That's a recipe for failure. And so I think, the larger issues of corporate capture and the way in which corporations distort science itself are the fundamental issues. There's a way in which capitalism is deeply, deeply irrational. It entrains people to believe, seven absurdities, before breakfast. And you're constantly being barraged with advertising and the kind of fetishistic, magical thinking that advertising engenders. You get this product, it will solve all of your problems, and it also believes in these, kind of mystical forces, superstitious forces, the invisible hand, the market equilibrium. It has all of these kind of fetishistic and superstitious concepts, and that has just kind of permeated not just the administration but the culture. So we're deeply, deeply stuck in an irrational society and an irrational leadership, and this is just the most recent example of it.
Final point on this, and then we'll get to what was supposed to be the point at hand. Where's the Democratic Party? Where's the outcry? Where they should be standing on the steps of someplace. There should be 50 of them standing at a podium saying, "Again, America, again, you're being lied to by this party. This guy is lying to you." They should be screaming about this. KJ.
Well, the problem is that the Democratic Party not only doesn't have the guts or the moral standing, but they don't have, they don't have any leg to stand on, because they have also been guilty of equally outrageous lies and mendacities and propaganda around science and around COVID. Once again, let me emphasize, it's widely understood in the scientific community, for example, and in the leadership across the planet, that global warming is a real issue. But if you look at our leadership in the legislature, what, 1/3, 2/3, don't even think that it's actually a real problem. So there is a real systemic breakdown of what it means to know and understand and to think things through rationally and critically. And, the Democratic Party was guilty of all kinds of mendacities. For example, almost everything they said about COVID was wrong. So this is a kind of ongoing and systemic issue. And of course, the Democrats and the Republicans are both, equally complicit. They're just complicit in different ways.
With that being said, the East African e-paper has the following headline: African military chiefs converge in Nairobi for African-led summit. And let me quickly just read a couple of paragraphs here. The United States Africa Command led 2025 African Chiefs of Defense Conference takes place in Nairobi. It started on Wednesday, at a time when many African countries are facing political and economic instability and humanitarian crises, which are likely to pose security threats to U.S. interests in Africa, and create space for expanded engagement by U.S. competitors. The conference serves as a premier forum for military leaders across the continent to convene, collaborate, and address pressing security challenges. Now, we're aware, we talked about this last week or a couple of weeks ago. The head of AFRICOM, General Michael Langley, testified before the U.S. Senate that General Ibrahim Traore was misusing resources, gold reserves from Burkina Faso to protect himself, and that he even called for the arrest of Traore. I want to play a video clip, and then KJ will get into the analysis. Let's roll the clip.
General, let's talk about countries taking on their own autonomy. You are on African soil, not for the first time, but this would be a good moment to ask about one of the countries that has taken its own autonomy, and that's Burkina Faso. Your remarks recently at the Senate seem to suggest that he's diverting, General Traore, is diverting its 4 billion gold reserves to sustain his military rule rather than for public welfare. These remarks sparked widespread condemnation across the continent. What did you mean by that statement?
Let me speak to Burkina Faso's sovereignty. They maintain their sovereignty. They make their decisions how they use their resources. They make their decisions who their resources go to for military support. That's their sovereign right. But my cautionary tale was just from a military perspective. That was a Senate Armed Services Committee asking me a direct question. Burkina Faso, a lot of great things going on to progress them forward, okay? But then when you look at the military part of it, knowing that that's the epicenter of global terrorism, it was my time to illuminate that this is probably their weakest point, and there needs to be sufficient resources going towards for the whole fight of terrorism in that country, period. They make their decisions, though. That's their sovereignty, their sovereign right to make their decisions, what is appropriate, what's not. But I wanted to illuminate that is going in the wrong direction now. ISIS is getting stronger. JNIM is getting stronger. Al-Qaeda in the lands of the Maghreb is getting stronger in that country.
And do you think it's getting stronger after General Traore took over?
It has. Just look at the numbers of attacks. It really has, since 2022. I've been tracking this since I took command.
Okay. There's, KJ, for me, there's a lot there, but I want to hear your analysis of what you just heard.
Well, it kind of encapsulates almost every propaganda trope that the US likes to put out. I mean, the first thing is that Traore is the most popular leader in Africa. He is the new Thomas Sankara, and this is a continent which has seen endless assassinations of African leaders by the colonial powers. How many? We don't know. We know that they're in the scores or even hundreds that have been killed, eliminated, or somehow, taken out of power. So Traore is he is the Che Guevara of Africa right now. It's incredibly popular, and the reason why he's popular is he's doing the things that good leaders do. For one of the things that he did was he nationalized the gold mines, which were largely held by British and Australian companies that were simply extracting the wealth out of their country, as they had done for scores of years before. What he's also done is he's insisted on tech transfer, and he's insisted that the refining itself take place in Africa. And this goes against the neo-colonial agenda. The idea is you want to suck out raw materials at very, very low cost, refine them elsewhere, and then, gain the lion's share of the added value. Traore is going against that. He's saying, if you have a company here, first he's nationalizing most of them. And then, for example, with the Russians, with Norgold, he's saying, you have to do tech transfer with us, and we are going to do the refining here. And this is the standard necessary approach that you need to start to develop your country. So what Traore is doing is he's developing his countries. He is asserting sovereignty. Remember, he kicked out the French. He closed the French embassy. He ended the military accord. So he's doing all of the things that are necessary in order to establish sovereignty and to develop a country that is meeting the needs of its people. And because of that, the United States wants to take him down. The allegation that somehow there is increased activity, terrorist activity, is a canard, and it's simply getting high on your own supply. Remember, Traore came in, and one of the things that he did, he cut his teeth on fighting Islamist insurgency, most notably Al-Qaeda and ISIS. And the U.S. has been using these fundamentalist Islamic forces since the end of World War II to undermine all Pan-African liberation movements. That has been part of their agenda in Africa and in Western Asia and even in China. They have been using fundamentalist Takfiri Islamists as shock troops and as death squads for U.S. imperialism. And he has been actively engaging in tamping that down. So I think we're really seeing the world in inverse. It's upside down what we're hearing here.
There's so much just hypocrisy, misinformation, and disinformation. So, for example, General Langley says that there's been an increase in Islamist groups in the country since President Traore took power. Well, I would bet that's because the United States has been funding the rise of those entities and paying them. And people might say, well, Wilmer, that's quite a conspiracy theory. Well, it might be, but I ask you to simply look at Syria as one of the most recent examples. The president of Syria, Ahmed Hussein al-Sharaa, was formerly known by his name of Abu Muhammad al-Jilani, who the United States paid to help lead ISIS or an ISIS element or entity to help overthrow Syria. So I'm not making this up. There's a history. There's a pattern of behavior here. So if I wanted to be kind and generous to General Langley, I would say, sir, with all due respect, you're being disingenuous with your statements. KJ.
I think that's very diplomatic, and that's very kind of you. And I think it's important to call out the hypocrisy.
I'm channeling my inner KJ Noh right now.
Okay. Well, in this situation, I would say, hypocrisy is the tribute that vice pays to virtue. And, this is over the top hypocrisy. It's over the top mendacity. Traore has been developing his country's economic capacity. It has made agreements with the Russians for a share of the gold processing in exchange for concrete and tangible demands for his own country. So the notion that all of this is he's yeah, I mean, this notion that he's using his country's gold reserves, for his own private, benefit or protection, that is absurdity. But the U.S. thinks that any country that has relations with Russia or with China or with global South countries in general is like a slave that has escaped from the plantation and therefore needs to be put down and is most certainly, is stealing their property by reclaiming their own sovereignty. Let's look again at the history. Algeria, Angola, Burkina Faso, Burundi, Cameroon, Congo, Egypt, Ethiopia, Guinea, all of these countries and others have had assassinations of their leaders because they tried to break out from colonialism. Let's think Patrice Lumumba, Thomas Sankara, Amilcar Cabral. All of these great revolutionary leaders, were assassinated, put down by the imperial colonial powers. And, clearly Traore has a target on his back. But what's different this time as opposed to, the first and second post-colonial struggles is that this time the smaller countries, even landlocked countries like Burkina Faso, can reach out to China and Russia and get solidarity and create their own alliance, the alliance of Sahel states, and they can resist together. And so that makes it a completely different equation, that before their resistance was simply snuffed out one by one by the Western colonial powers, by the French, etc., because the West did not tolerate these countries liberating themselves. But this time, the world has changed, and the countries can connect, and there is a greater movement across the global South, led by China and other countries, that is creating something which is unstoppable. And I think this is the real fear of the United States. And this is why I fear further violence and further dirty tricks. And certainly this is why we're hearing all this incredible propaganda and demonization, information warfare.
So, KJ, you just mentioned China and you mentioned Russia, both of whom I believe are anti-imperialist countries. And so I have always tried to frame this discussion, if you boil it down to its most basic elements, as a struggle between imperialism and anti-imperialism. And that's why in my open I asked, and I asked this specifically directed at Langley's comments. Based upon his comments, what do we learn about the colonialist mindset, the neo-colonialist mindset, the colonial worldview, and the shifting imperialist mindset?
Well, I mean, the first thing to note is that the imperialist mindset is a mindset of self-deception. It lies to itself, and it lies to its public. It lies constantly, and it has to do this. As I said, it has to get high on its own supply, because what it is built on is extraction, expropriation, and violence. And in order to do that, you need to, dope yourself up with an entire apparatus, an entire narrative apparatus of mystification, manufacture of consent, and self-deception in order to perpetrate the continued structural violence that neo-imperialism relies on.
We have new members, Boat Cobb and Sandra Hearn. Thank you both very much for becoming new members. Greatly, greatly appreciate that. And we have a comment here from David Omawale. America will never let African countries be free. David, I think you're absolutely right, which takes us to the crux of the point, because when you look at what's happening in Burkina Faso, when you look at what's happening in Niger, when you look at what's happening in the other members of the Alliance of Sahel States.
Mali.
Mali, thank you.
Mhm.
That's the very point. They're not waiting for their freedom. They have gone from the neo-colonial model, which is flag independence, but still dependence on the colony, to seizing control of their economy, seizing control of their resources, throwing the colonial power out, and taking charge and control of their own destinies. That's the whole point, KJ.
You're absolutely right. You know, freedom is not something that you are granted by your colonizer, because if that were the case, it's not real freedom. It's freedom is something you wrest back, you take back, you struggle, and you claim it for yourself. And that is what is happening right now with the Alliance of Sahel States. As I pointed out, you know, they've kicked out the French, you know, which colonized large swaths of Africa, and, you know, had a kind of financial control of Africa as well, is no longer welcome there. You know, as Burkina Faso has closed its French embassy. It doesn't get as, you know, it doesn't get any starker than that. And I think, you know, just because we're connecting the dots, looking at the big picture, we have to see this, what's happening right now in the current moment, as an upsurge in liberation movements across the world. And most certainly, belatedly, but certainly necessary, and certainly in Africa as well. We're seeing, you know, the Bandung project, the Third World Liberation Movement happening. It was incomplete, and it was thwarted, and was actually stopped through, as I pointed out, genocide and assassinations and comprador quislings. But we're seeing this coming back with, this time, a real power of solidarity of the global South rising up to overthrow the European colonial project, which has endured for over 500 years now.
And so now we have the reports that the Prime Minister of Senegal has now gone to Mali, gone to Burkina Faso, and met with President Traoré. Now, if those alliances continue to develop, that gives them direct access to the ocean. That gives them maritime commerce, compatibility, travel, all that kinds of stuff. So again, when you listen to General Langley, I mean, I understand he's a United States general and he's the head of AFRICOM. I understand that, but KJ, there are just some realities that you just can't ignore, and
yeah, I mean, so here we are, you know, we're coming back to this irrationality, this lack of a connection to reality. You know, the neocon mantra, you know, we create our own reality. You know, the rest of you can study it, and we just continue and make more of it. So they're still in this neocon mode, this notion that they're not accountable to physical reality or physical facts on the ground. They can simply kind of bluff their way. Now, you can bluff your way in a courtroom, but you can't bluff your way in the actual world. Geopolitics is about concrete reality.
And to that point, one of the things that Langley says, a lot of great things are going on to help the country move forward. Now, Traoré's been there about 18 months. Burkina Faso was a colony for what, 200 years?
For a long time, at least over a century.
Oh, okay. So let's just say, for simple math, 100 years, just for simple math. So Burkina Faso has been one of the poorest countries on the planet. Not the continent, not West Africa, the planet. Since it's been a colony, it's as if not poorer than Yemen. And when you talk about as if not poorer than Yemen, you're not talking poor, you're talking po, because they can't afford 2 O's. And in 18 months, he's been able to take control of his country. He's been able to nationalize its resources. He's been able to start building nuclear power plants. He's been able to start refining their own cotton, turning the raw cotton ball into a textile and export it. He's been able to change rice production in the country. And so you say glibly, a lot of great things are going on to move the country forward. Then you should be applauding those things. You should, right? But then he has to say, but from a military perspective, he's taking the following action, but he never explains why. And the reason is, General Langley, because you're trying to murder the man. He's protecting himself against you. And that part of the discussion, and Kevin Baptiste, thank you so much. What must be the fundamental organizing principle for the liberation of the continent? Great question. Let's throw that into all of that I just blabbered about. What must be the fundamental organizing principle for the liberation of the continent? KJ.
Well, national sovereignty. You start with sovereignty. You cannot have a country, and you certainly cannot develop without any sovereignty.
And define sovereignty, because a lot of people hear the word, but they don't really know the definition of sovereignty.
Well, it means that you have the right to determine the type of government you have and the policies that you will enact. And that has never been the case as long as you have had a series of quislings and compradors and neocolonial relations. So when you throw off the yoke of that neocolonial relationship, then you have a chance at sovereignty. Then you have a chance at development. And that sovereignty also requires a strong capacity to defend yourself.
And I was waiting for you to get there, because as we're talking about Michael Langley and as we're talking about AFRICOM, for me, that's a very, very important element. You have the right, and that right is internationally recognized, to use military force to defend your defined geographic space on your terms. So when Langley says, I respect their sovereignty, but you then try to invade them, or you then try to pay other entities to go in and assassinate their government, the heads of their government, again, that's an incredible contradiction, to be kind.
Absolutely, yes. I mean, I think that's a kind way of putting it. Remember, before they murder the human, they murder the truth. And so this is what we're seeing right now. And of course, the truth is, once again, from the large perspective, Africa is a rich country, but its people are poor. And its people are poor because it has been systemically exploited and impoverished. And when a leader tries to reverse that, then they are put into the crosshairs of the imperial powers. But I think that this time, it's not going to be that easy. I don't think Traoré is going to go the way of Lumumba, Sankara, the way of Amilcar Cabral. I think that we are in a different moment, a different historic moment. As I said, there is real power in the rising movements in Africa and all across the global South.
Early in the Langley Senate testimony, which we didn't play, but early in the Langley Senate testimony, did you hear him say that the United States has a command of the facts?
I did, and I had to, keep myself from laughing out loud because, that is, as I said, that is one of the core problems with the neocon administration is they're so far detached from the facts that they are not capable of making rational decisions. As I said, it's a world upside down that they're selling, and they're high on their own supply.
Dr. Nick, I'm not sure I understand your question. You said, if that's the case, how does KJ explain all the attempts on Traore's life? I'm not sure what you mean by if that's the case. So if you could elaborate on that so I can get your question answered, because you may have misunderstood what was said. So what do you make of this African military chiefs conference? Because again, this East African e-paper that, as they're describing, African military chiefs converge in Nairobi for African-led summit, but this is actually a meeting that's called and managed by AFRICOM.
Yes, well, it's a US-led summit of compradors and quislings, and they want to see if they can get enough, momentum to undermine and overthrow both the government and the changes that are happening in Burkina Faso. They don't want any country to reach escape velocity. They're trying to prevent that. And they're using all of their quislings to see if they can, take down certainly Burkina Faso and Traore. So as I said, it's a dangerous moment, but it's also a moment of potential hope and transformation.
And that's going to fail like ECOWAS failed as the United States tried to turn to ECOWAS when Niger first threw France out. We were told, ECOWAS is going to send troops in, and that didn't. I think the leaders of ECOWAS looked at the landscape and said, you know what, we don't want none of that smoke, because they knew that the horse was out the barn, and they weren't going to, and they were going to be able to bring it back. So Dr. Nick, he clarified his question. And he says, KJ mentioned that he doesn't think Traore will go the way of Sankara, as in AKA rubbed out. And that was the basis of his question. So how do you explain all the attempts on Traore's life? Well, they're trying to kill him, but they're not being successful. KJ.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the two are not incompatible. Certainly, they want him rubbed out. They want him eliminated. They want him to go the way of the hundreds of other African leaders who were vanished or eliminated or disappeared or died in exile. That's what they want from him. But I'm saying that Sankara is Traore is currently the most popular leader in Africa. He's the leader of a young, vibrant nation. The average age in Burkina Faso is 17. It is a young country full of youthful vigor and idealism. And I don't think that they will, I don't think they will let this happen. I believe with the support of the Alliance of Sahel States and the support of Russia and China and the other the BRI and the BRICS, I do not think that he will be easily taken down. And I think that has to do with the capacity of himself, of Traore, to defend himself. As you pointed out, sovereignty involves the capacity to defend yourself. He is a military man. I think he knows a thing or two about security and defense.
And to your point, I think a clear example of that was Traore left his country, Burkina Faso, and flew to Moscow to celebrate Victory Day. And I was making the point when that happened that for all of the unrest that is going on around him, he must have a pretty high level of confidence that he would be able to leave his country and then have a country to return to. And I can't remember who it was I was talking to, but the expert I was talking to made the point, you have to realize he flew on a Russian plane with a Russian military escort, that he didn't just call United or American Airlines and say, hey, book me a flight to Moscow. No, Russia guaranteed his safety and there and back. And he was also there with President Xi Jinping. So I think when you factor all of that into this, that is an element of difference between what happened to Thomas Sankara versus what they're trying to do to President and what happened to Patrice Lumumba and what they're trying to do. Let me quickly read this point from Ken McGee. Traoré is a modern day Pan-African, and that is what makes him threat both internationally and unfortunately within Africa too. And don't forget, some of the greatest and most powerful African kingdoms, which predate ancient Greece and Rome, were exactly in what is now called AES, Mali, the alliance of Mali, Songhai, Fulani, Akan, etc. Historically speaking, something profound is happening there, and soon they will work out Pan-African deals to get oil and critical minerals that they don't have. Great point.
Absolutely. Yes. I mean, it is the return of the African civilization. I mean, this is way overdue, and it's happening in Africa. It's happening in Asia. It's happening around the world.
Let us switch gears and look at the domestic front for a moment as well. There are two things that I'd like to get your comment on. One, this is from the Washington Post. Judge blocks Trump administration effort to ban foreign students at Harvard. Students are already reporting visa denials and revocations. Oh, and seeking to transfer, according to a university official. And can you give us a couple more minutes?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay, great. So a federal judge yesterday blocked the Trump administration's attempt to bar international students from enrolling at Harvard. Your thoughts, KJ?
So this is very interesting. Clearly, the Trump has Harvard in its crosshairs. It wants to take Harvard down, most notably, or most likely, as an example to other universities. It wants to discipline some of the trends that it's seeing in the universities, most notably, for example, Palestinian, demonstrating against the genocide, demonstrating for Palestinian rights, demanding ceasefire. Trump administration does not want that. It also wants to undermine the academy and control it because it thinks that it has, quote unquote, gone too liberal and is obsessed with, diversity, etc. That is actually, once again, a misreading of reality. Schools like Harvard and other Ivy League schools, they're actually finishing schools for the ruling elite. This is where the deep state kind of entrains and grooms its leaders and then stamps them with its imprimatur of approval. And so Trump is throwing out red meat and working a very narrow ideological agenda, but at the same time, he's undercutting the source and the foundation of U.S. power itself. Traditionally, the U.S. has always been able to drain the brains from the rest of the world with its, money and its, supposedly prestigious schools. But by doing this and by making the schools inhospitable, he's actually undercutting the intellectual and scientific foundations of the US capitalist regime. Remember, it's only through waves and waves of successive immigrants that the United States built itself as a science and technological power. In the 40s, from Europe, refugees from Europe, the Hungarians, the Martians, John von Neumann, and then we also had the Nazis thrown in, and then we saw waves and waves of Eastern European and Asian immigrants and scholars and students. They essentially built out the US's scientific and technological prowess by doing the grunt work of research and development. And Trump is, because again, thinking like a lawyer and thinking like and throwing out red meat to his racist anti-immigrant base. He's saying, well, we're going to throw out all of them, and then we're going to make America great again by ourselves, meaning make America white again. And he's also said that he's going to take the money that Harvard receives and put it into trade schools, etc. I mean, that's a good idea. Harvard doesn't need government money. It has $50 billion. It's sitting on $50 billion. It's actually an investment fund masquerading as an institution of higher education. So they actually don't need government money, although they're happy to take it. They're happy to suckle at that trough. But I think that, funding trade schools and funding schools in general is a good idea. But I'll believe it when I see it. So I think, there's so many contradictions here. It's essentially Trump undermining the source of American strength by undercutting its educational system and by actually encouraging intellectual and educational development across the world. Those Chinese students, and there's been, blanket Chinese ban, or it looks like they're going to revoke all Chinese visas. Those Chinese students, are going to stay home and do research in their own universities. Already, the majority of top-notch research universities are Chinese, but that's just going to make it even more powerful. Or they're going to go to countries other than the United States. So again, the US is sawing off the branch on which it sits, and it thinks that as it does this, that it's somehow making itself more powerful and more, efficient. It's absolutely the opposite. And it is the same issue that we've been talking about throughout this hour. People getting high on their own supply, telling themselves lies, believing that, and not understanding that there is physical reality and they need to be in touch with physical reality in order to function properly.
And as Tom Porter would say, to your point, these racists would rather sit down and eat their own racism than have a fine meal. Quick point, and because I think this is an incredibly relevant point back to the Burkina Faso issue. Again, Ken says, I hope they won't take him down, but we can't forget that Sankara was killed by his cousin and close confidant, Blaise Compaoré, but Traoré knows that too. And then we also know that Lumumba was taken down by not his cousin, but his lieutenant general. Oh shoot! I'm drawing a blank. He became a horrific leader of Congo.
Yes.
Mobutu
Yeah.
Sese Seko.
Yeah.
One of his own generals.
Yes.
Was the mastermind? Not well. The Belgium was the mastermind. He was the pivotal point in the assassination of Patrice Lumumba. And to Ken's point, Traoré does know that. Hence, I think because it was about a month or so ago that they found that that the United States tried to bribe some of Traore's generals, and all of that got uncovered. So to Ken's point, yes, it seems as though he does know that. So with all of that, and again, Kevin Baptiste, again, my dear brother, I want to again shout out. Thank you for that very generous super sticker. Greatly. And we did discuss the fundamental organizing principle for the liberation of the continent. Brother KJ Noh, man, as always, you are so on point and so generous with your time when I call. Greatly appreciate it. And have a wonderful weekend. I look forward to having you back.
Thank you. Always a pleasure.
Thank you, KJ. Thank you. All right, folks. So thank you all so much for listening to the Connecting the Dots podcast with me, Dr. Wilmer Leon. Again, big shout out to Ken for joining us because I know that his battery was low and he squeezed in some time. My dear brother, thank you. Also, folks, stay tuned. New episode on Monday. Oh, VJ Prashad is going to join us on Monday. So as you got so much out of the conversation with KJ Noh today, you're going to get a whole lot from VJ Prashad. He's going to join us on Monday. Stay tuned. Again, new episode on Monday. Follow, subscribe. All of you that are listening on other platforms, please subscribe on the YouTube platform, and you can also make comments on the platform that you are viewing us on, and those will get to me, and we can acknowledge them during the show. Follow us on social media. All the links are below. And remember that this is where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge. Talk without analysis is just chatter, and we do not chatter here on Connecting the Dots. Why? Because it's rhetoric-free broadcast. See y'all Monday. Until then, I am Dr. Wilmer Leon. Have a wonderful, blessed, safe weekend. Peace.
Connecting the Dots with Dr. Wilmer Leon, where the analysis of politics, culture, and history converge.